I would like to introduce to you our keynote speaker for the evening. She's a name that you will all have heard. Lauren Booth is a pro-Palestinian activist, broadcaster and journalist, and she's written for many, many well-known publications such as the Sunday Times and the Daily Mail. She was a vocal opponent of the Iraq War and a supporter of the Stop the War coalition. In August 2008, she travelled to Gaza by ship from Cyprus to highlight the blockade of the Gaza Strip and deliver hearing aids and balloons to a deaf school in Gaza. She chose to remain behind in Gaza and was subsequently refused entry into both Israel and Egypt. She said that she believed that by refusing her the right to leave Gaza and return to her home country, Israel and Egypt were in breach of Article 13 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, specifically regarding the freedom of movement. Last year, she chose to become Muslim in the holy city of Qum. Please welcome me in joining onto stage our keynote speaker for this evening, Lauren Booth.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. And to the Arab people amongst you, Kifa Halek. I don't know how to say that in Iranian. I really should know how to say, how are you doing in Iranian? Anybody? All right. I'll learn it from Press TV. Thank you. Mercy. I'm here tonight to celebrate the work of a charity that has really touched my heart. And I can see by everybody here who knows, and has probably been here for the 6th year running, you know it much better than I do, but really the work of Mr. Kareem and all of the other patrons and all of the volunteers here tonight deserves our gratitude, because looking after orphans and those who struggle to make ends meet and those with disabilities is something that, as Muslims, as human beings, we hold that so much more important than how successful we might be and our own egos. So I'm going to give a little taste tonight of what I'd like to share with you, which is my journey to Islam. Because I have to say, a year ago, I couldn't imagine myself standing here without my blonde hair out, without other bits of me out, really. Probably without a glass of wine in my hand. So it seems like a very sudden journey, but it began as so much of my, what I call my real life, began in Palestine in 2005. In 2005, I was a journalist living in France, in a nice little farmhouse, writing articles about living in France in a nice little farmhouse, which is a good job if you can get it. I also wrote about politics, but I had no sensation of needing to do something for anyone else. It just hadn't really occurred to me. I thought I was a nice person, but really my ego was out of control. The media does terrible things to a human being, and it certainly doesn't enlighten us or put us on a spiritual path, but there is one being who puts us on a spiritual path, and I didn't know either Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or that I was on that path. So in 2005, when the Palestinian delegate to the United Kingdom, Afif Safir, said to me, Lauren, you've shown some interest in Palestine. Why don't you go? I said to him, is there anything else I could do to show interest in Palestine? Because I was scared. Because somehow, deep inside me, I'd absorbed all of the media preconceptions about Arabs and all of the suppositions about the bogeymen of the 21st century, Muslims. No, I didn't ever externalize that because it wasn't real to me. But I'll tell you, when I first crossed into the West Bank that night in January the 19th, 2005, and I went through an Israeli checkpoint, I knew then that I had a definite mild dose of Islamophobia. I'll remember that moment when I went into the West Bank because the Israeli soldier looked at my passport as I went through in the taxi and said, "British, hey, we love Britain." You can love that, can't you? An American in an Israeli uniform welcoming a Briton to his land. It made me feel a little bit sick. So I went through into Ramallah, and I was lucky enough to get an interview with Mahmoud Abbas. And I remember that well because I found myself surrounded by 6'5" Palestinians holding guns in a lift. And I remember the door of the lift closing, and the men were talking in their walkie-talkies. And to me it sounded something like this. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yalla, yalla, yalla. Bukra, bukra, bukra. And in my head, a little subtitle came up, "We'll kill the white woman later." And when I looked at the guns, I thought, you know, I've seen this film before, and it doesn't go well for the blonde lady. It was really, really deeply ingrained in me that Palestinians were terrorists, that people from other parts of the world who were Muslims were aggressive, that Islam was against me. If I was good, I could not be a Muslim. And Muslims couldn't be good because they couldn't help themselves being bad. Strange to think of that now, standing here. That first trip to Palestine, I went for Eid in Jenin. And I had to travel in a car with a lovely young lady called Natalie. We were going to visit her family. And a journey that should take around 2.5 hours from Ramallah to Jenin took us 7.5 hours. Everywhere along the route, the Israelis had pulled boulders into the road, or had bulldozed the road altogether. We had to go up and down mountains, talk about off-roading, but off-roading in a 25-year-old Volvo is not funny. I actually threw up 3 times. We ended up getting out on a rocky hillside, and I watched with horror men, women, and children preparing for their religious festival of joy, carrying bags and dragging suitcases down the hillside to try and find people to give them a lift on the other side. And when we got to Jenin, in the refugee camp, I went for a walk around on my own to see what it was like. And I remember a little boy there, terrible eye problem, all scabbed over, very difficult to look at, and the other one half closed with pus. The sort of treatments that are curable, that the Lady Fatima Trust puts money into. And his eyes were all gummed up, and he pointed a gun at me, a toy gun. And I was standing there going, "Come on, I'm a visitor. It's okay, it's okay." His eyes were kind of blank. There was trauma there. So I was standing there going, "Oh, we're playing a game." And suddenly the taxi driver who'd driven me there jumped in front of me and pulled the gun to the ground. It was a real gun. That's how unhappy, how terrorized the children of Jenin were at that point. Then I had the extreme pleasure of going to Gaza in 2008 with the Free Gaza movement. Spending time in the world's biggest concentration camp. I will call it a concentration camp. It's hard to describe it as a pleasure, but I promise you it is. I was there for a month in 2008. I remember visiting a lady's house. Well, really a cement room in a refugee camp. Everybody there greeted me. Assalamu alaikum. How are you? Assalamu alaikum. Cup of tea. People so smiling and so friendly that all of those headlines that called it Hamastan, the Islamic enclave, the terrorist republic of Palestine, they just dissolved. I'd gone into another world, a world where the children grabbed you by the hand and gave you smiles, where the women gave you the clothes off their backs, where they would feed you when they had no food. I realized I was falling in love with the Palestinian people. If any of you have read a very famous book called The Road to Mecca by Muhammad Assad. Does anybody know that book? I recommend it. It's a wonderful, wonderful journey by a journalist 100 years ago who didn't know he was going to become a Muslim. But he was on a camel in the desert, and a companion said to him, so how did you come to find Islam? And his friend said he fell in love with the Arabs and then he found Islam. Well, having read that book, I realized that's what was happening to me. And I went to this lady's cement block living quarters in the Rafah refugee camp one night at Eid, during Eid. And she greeted me like this: Assalamu alaikum, fadal, fadal. And the smile on her face was so exquisite that I forgot that I was in this fallen down, terrible condition, cement block room with dirty mattresses lined up around the walls where people would sleep that night. I forgot that I was going into a place where the kitchen was not much bigger than this here, where she had 2 little cooking rings where she tried to cook for 9 people, if she had anything to cook. Because she greeted me as if it was the Taj Mahal, her home. And it made me want to smile. But it also made me angry, her smile. Because it was Ramadan. Yeah, it was Ramadan. And I said to her, I don't understand why your God makes you go hungry for a whole month. I just don't understand why, when it's already difficult for life in Gaza, why you should not drink water and why you should not eat during the day. What is your God trying to prove? And this lady in the Gaza refugee camp, she looked at me with a sweet smile in her face and she said, Sister, we fast in Gaza to remember the poor. I've told that story an awful lot of times now. But it always does something to me inside. Because I felt like a key went into a lock. And a thought came into my head. If this is Islam, I'm in. Because what I saw at that moment was a purity that was love. Sheer love. Not politics, not sectarianism, not schisms, not drones, but sheer love. I didn't know that I was on the road to Mecca myself. But last October, after many years now working as a minor Palestinian activist, just trying to be a mother and give some support, because once you've lived amongst the poorest people in the world, and once you've experienced their smiles and their hopes, and you've had them cry for your misery, you can't just walk away. So I went to Qom in Iran last October. I was there working. I was in Tehran reporting on the Al-Quds Day March. And I had one day off. And a colleague of mine said, you really should come to Qom, to the shrine of Bibi Fatima. And I want you to see it. And I went into the mosque and I did wudu, because I knew how to do it, having lived in Gaza for a while. And I went up to the shrine and I just watched the other women, what they were doing. And they all seemed to touch the shrine and then pray to Allah. So I stood there and I just said, Dear Allah, thank you very much for this journey that I'm on. I have nothing to ask because you've given me everything. Please bless Palestine. And then I sat down on the floor. And it was very busy. It was a Tuesday night, which is Pilgrim's Night. So, you know, there were children doing cartwheels and women breaking their fast on the floor. It wasn't quiet. But the second I sat down, I was somewhere else. Somewhere I'd never been before in my life. A realm of such absolute peace and tranquility and joy that I knew that above a certain point in our universe, everything's okay. That none of these worries, the things that we have going on in our heads, they don't matter at all, because above a certain point, everything is okay. There's joy and tranquility. I sat there for a long time, and a young woman came over to me. I was in a chador, so you could only see my face. I was very curled up. And she sat opposite me, and she held my hands, and she looked into my eyes, and she said, "I love you. I love you." I'd never seen her before. I just felt at that moment that she was my sister and my daughter, and I was her aunt and her grandmother. I can't really explain the love that went between us, but it was something almost fierce. And then she backed away from me and she went. And I understood the love that is the Ummah. And they did what 8 and 10-year-olds do. They went to their bedroom and made a list of questions. And then they came up to me and they said, here are the questions. When you're a Muslim, will you still be mummy? That was question 1. And I said, yes, when I'm a Muslim, I will still be mummy. In fact, I suspect I will be an even better mummy. And they gave a little tick. And there's a question number 2. Will you smoke when you're a Muslim? I had to think about that one, because I know a lot of Muslim people smoke. But I thought, this is such a big change. Why not go for the whole thing? Really cleanse yourself out as you're cleansing your spiritual being out. So I said, I won't smoke. And they said, great. And the third question was, when you're a Muslim, will you drink alcohol? And I said, when I'm a Muslim, I will never drink alcohol again. To which my daughters replied rather worryingly, hooray! Make of that what you will. And the final question, just to show you how pure children are, is this. When you're a Muslim, will you wear low-cut tops? I said, what have they been hearing at school about Islam? I said, no, when I'm a Muslim, I will always have this area of my body covered up. And they said, we love Islam. My mother was slightly more difficult to persuade. I told her about the experience at Qum, and she was crying. And she said, that's beautiful, to have a spiritual experience with God. You know, that's amazing. And the next week I saw her, and I had a scarf on. And she said, what have you got that on your head for? And I said, well, remember that conversation we had, Mum? I'm a Muslim. And she went very dangerously quiet. And she looked at me and went, Muslim. Muslim. I thought you said Buddhist. Muslim. What, those nutters? I said, yes, Mum, those nutters. And then I sent her chocolates and flowers and letters, and I apologized for everything I'd ever done before, because I finally understood what it was to be a daughter, because I was reading the Quran. And now she thinks that Islam is a religion for nutters who love their mothers. And alhamdulillah, she's half right. Thank you very much for listening. Please give generously this evening.